Have you ever felt your heart race when opening a credit card statement? Maybe you've avoided checking your bank account for weeks because the anxiety feels overwhelming. Or perhaps you find yourself making completely irrational financial decisions that you can't explain, even to yourself. If any of this sounds familiar, you're definitely not alone, and more importantly, you're not broken. What you're experiencing has a name, and understanding it might just change everything about how you handle money. My name is Nick, and I spend way too much time thinking about the psychology behind our financial decisions and why some people seem naturally disciplined with money while others struggle with every purchase. If you're someone who wants to understand the deeper forces driving your financial behavior instead of just getting another budgeting tip that doesn't stick, make sure to hit that subscribe button and give this video a thumbs up if it ends up being helpful. Here's something that might shock you. According to recent research from Experian, 68% of American adults have suffered from or are currently dealing with financial trauma. 68%. That means if you're in a room with 10 people, nearly 7 of them are carrying some form of financial psychological baggage that's affecting their daily money decisions. Yet somehow we never talk about this. We discuss investment strategies, budgeting methods, and savings accounts, but we completely ignore the emotional and psychological foundation that determines whether any of those strategies will actually work. Think about it this way. You wouldn't try to build a house on a cracked foundation and expect it to stand strong during a storm. Yet that's exactly what most people do with their finances. They pile budgeting apps, investment accounts, and financial goals on top of unresolved money trauma and wonder why nothing seems to stick. The foundation keeps shifting and everything built on top eventually crumbles. Before we dive into the specifics of financial trauma and how it manifests, let me paint you a picture of what normal actually looks like when it comes to money psychology. Most people assume that financially successful individuals are just naturally disciplined or were born with some special money gene. The reality is far more complex and, frankly, more hopeful than that. Financial discipline isn't something you either have or don't have. It's something you develop, often in spite of your psychological programming, not because of it. The most successful wealth builders I've studied have one thing in common. They've learned to recognize their psychological patterns around money and develop strategies to work with their brain rather than against it. They understand that every financial decision is filtered through years of conditioning, family messages, and emotional associations that have nothing to do with logic or math. Let's start with something that affects every single person watching this video. Financial anxiety. This isn't just feeling a little nervous when paying bills. We're talking about a physiological response that can mirror the symptoms of post-traumatic stress disorder. Your palms get sweaty when you think about money. Your sleep gets disrupted when bills are due. You might even experience what researchers call hypervigilance around financial discussions, where your body goes into fight or flight mode during conversations about budgets or investments. Here's what makes this particularly fascinating and somewhat depressing. 23% of adults and 36% of millennials experience financial stress at levels that actually qualify for a PTSD diagnosis. Let that sink in for a moment. More than 1 in 3 millennials are walking around with trauma-level responses to money, and we wonder why traditional financial advice doesn't work for them. The symptoms are remarkably consistent across different demographics. Avoidance behaviors like refusing to open bank statements or declining social invitations to limit spending, persistent negative thoughts about finances that make concentration difficult, constant anxiety leading to insomnia, or nightmares about money, even heightened startle responses where something as simple as a phone call can trigger distress because of fear. It might be a debt collector. Now, if you're thinking this sounds dramatic, consider your own responses to financial stress. When was the last time you felt completely calm and relaxed while reviewing your monthly expenses? When did you last make a significant purchase without any emotional turbulence whatsoever? For most people, money carries an emotional charge that goes far beyond the practical implications of the transaction. This is where things get really interesting and honestly a bit disturbing. Much of our financial psychology isn't even our own. It's inherited. Generational financial trauma passes down through families just like eye color or height, except it's invisible and often more powerful in shaping our adult behavior than we realize. Maybe your grandparents lived through the Great Depression and developed hoarding behaviors around money that they passed to your parents, who then passed a scarcity mindset to you. Or perhaps you grew up in a household where money seemed to come and go unpredictably, creating a feast or famine mentality that makes you either overspend when you have money or panic when you don't. Research shows that children who witness parents struggling with finances, experiencing housing instability, or living through economic hardship develop deep-seated anxiety patterns around money that persist well into adulthood. These patterns operate below conscious awareness, influencing every financial decision without us even realizing it. Consider this scenario. You're in a well-off family, but your parents used money as a tool for control, rewarding you monetarily only for perfect grades or specific behaviors while withholding affection when you didn't meet their standards. Fast forward 20 years, and you might find yourself either completely reckless with money as a form of rebellion or obsessively controlling every penny as a way to feel secure. Neither approach is rational, but both make perfect sense when viewed through the lens of childhood conditioning. The most insidious part of generational financial trauma is how it disguises itself as practical wisdom. Your mother's constant worry about spending money wasn't just being careful, it was anxiety passed down from her mother's experience of genuine scarcity. Your father's reluctance to invest wasn't just being conservative. It was fear inherited from previous generations who lost everything in market crashes or business failures. This invisible inheritance shapes everything from how much risk you're willing to take with investments to whether you feel deserving of financial success. It determines whether you see money as a tool for freedom or a source of stress. And here's the kicker. Most people never question these inherited beliefs because they feel so fundamentally true. But here's where this gets both more complicated and more hopeful. Your money personality isn't fixed. The collection of beliefs, attitudes, and emotions you have about money can be understood, examined, and gradually reshaped. This isn't about positive thinking or pretending your anxiety doesn't exist. It's about developing financial self-awareness and learning to work with your psychological patterns rather than being controlled by them. The first step in this process is recognizing your specific money scripts. These are the deeply ingrained beliefs about money that operate automatically in your subconscious. Some common ones include money is the root of all evil, rich people are greedy, I don't deserve financial success, money doesn't buy happiness, or there's never enough money to go around. Each of these scripts drives specific behaviors. If you believe money is evil, you'll unconsciously sabotage your efforts to build wealth. If you think you don't deserve success, you'll make decisions that keep you struggling financially. If you operate from a scarcity mindset, believing there's never enough, you'll either hoard money anxiously or spend it all immediately because deep down, you don't believe you can keep it anyway. The fascinating thing about money scripts is how logical they seem from the inside. Your financial behaviors make perfect sense when viewed through the lens of your underlying beliefs. The problem is that many of these beliefs were formed during childhood when you had limited information and even less control over your circumstances. What worked as a survival mechanism when you were 8 years old might be completely counterproductive when you're 35 and trying to build wealth. The financial anxiety that protected you from your parents' unpredictable money drama might now be preventing you from making reasonable investment decisions. The spending habits that helped you feel some control during childhood chaos might now be keeping you trapped in a cycle of debt and stress. This is where understanding the psychology of money becomes incredibly powerful. When you can identify your specific patterns and trace them back to their origins, they lose much of their unconscious control over your behavior. You begin to see them as learned responses rather than fundamental truths about reality. But recognizing these patterns is only half the battle. The other half is developing what researchers call financial discipline, which sounds about as exciting as watching paint dry, but is actually one of the most liberating skills you can master. And before you roll your eyes and think, this is where I tell you to just budget harder and stop buying coffee, let me explain what real financial discipline actually looks like. Here's something that will probably make you feel better about your current situation. The number of Americans who consider themselves disciplined financial planners has dropped from 65% in 2020 to just 45% in 2024. So if you feel like you're terrible with money, congratulations, you're officially normal. The bar has been lowered so much that simply paying your bills on time now qualifies as advanced financial management. But here's the thing about discipline that most people completely misunderstand. It's not about willpower or being naturally good at delayed gratification. Those people who seem effortlessly disciplined with money aren't operating from some superior moral character. They've simply learned to design their environment and decision-making process in ways that make good financial choices easier than bad ones. Think about it like this. So, if you're trying to eat healthier, you don't rely on willpower to resist the cookies in your kitchen cabinet. You stop buying cookies and fill your kitchen with healthier options instead. Financial discipline works the same way. You don't rely on your future self to make perfect decisions under pressure. You create systems that make those decisions automatically. The research on this is pretty clear. People with good financial self-control don't actually have better willpower than everyone else. They're just better at avoiding situations where willpower is required. They automate their savings, so they never have to decide whether to save money each month. They use cash for discretionary spending because handing over physical bills creates more psychological resistance than swiping a card. They remove shopping apps from their phones and unsubscribe from promotional emails because they understand that every temptation they eliminate is one less decision their future self has to make perfectly. This is where the psychology gets really interesting. Your brain is constantly trying to conserve energy by turning repeated behaviors into automatic habits. This works great when you're learning to drive or brush your teeth, but it can work against you when those automatic habits involve spending money you don't have or avoiding financial responsibilities that make you anxious. The good news is that you can hijack this same psychological mechanism to build wealth instead of destroying it, but it requires understanding how your specific brain works rather than trying to force yourself into some generic financial discipline template that works for other people. For example, some people are naturally motivated by avoiding loss, while others are motivated by potential gains. If you're loss averse, telling yourself you could become rich by investing might not be nearly as motivating as calculating how much money you'll lose to inflation by keeping everything in savings accounts. If you're gain focused, visualizing your future wealthy self might be more effective than focusing on all the things that could go wrong if you don't save money. Here's where it gets even more personalized. Your money trauma and inherited scripts don't just affect your emotions around money. They actually change how your brain processes financial information. Someone with deep scarcity programming might see a market dip and panic sell everything because their nervous system interprets any financial uncertainty as a threat to survival. Someone with abundance programming might see the same market dip as a buying opportunity because they've learned to associate uncertainty with potential rather than danger. Neither response is right or wrong, but understanding your default programming helps you make more conscious choices. Maybe you tend to panic during market volatility, so you create rules for yourself about waiting 48 hours before making any major financial changes during stressful periods. Or maybe you're overly optimistic about risk, so you force yourself to consider worst case scenarios before making investment decisions. The key insight here is that financial discipline isn't about overriding your psychology. It's about working with your psychology more skillfully. This means accepting that you're going to have emotional reactions to money and planning for those reactions rather than pretending they don't exist. Let's talk about something that affects literally everyone, but gets almost no attention in traditional financial advice: present bias. This is your brain's tendency to prioritize immediate rewards over future benefits, even when the future benefits are objectively much larger. It's why you might choose to spend money on a vacation today instead of contributing to retirement, even though you intellectually understand that compound interest makes the retirement contribution worth significantly more over time. Present bias isn't a character flaw or a sign of poor discipline. It's a fundamental feature of how human brains are wired. For most of human history, focusing on immediate survival was more important than long-term planning, because there was no guarantee you'd survive long enough for long-term planning to matter. Your brain still operates with this ancient programming, which makes modern financial planning feel unnatural and difficult. Understanding this helps explain why traditional advice like just save more money or invest for the future feels so unsatisfying. Your brain literally discounts future rewards, making them feel less real and less motivating than immediate pleasures. Fighting against this tendency with pure willpower is exhausting and usually ineffective. Instead, successful wealth builders learn to make future rewards feel more immediate and present. They use visualization techniques to make their future retired self feel like a real person they care about rather than an abstract concept. They celebrate small financial milestones to create immediate positive feedback for long-term behaviors. They find ways to make saving and investing feel rewarding in the present moment rather than just beneficial in some distant future. This is where apps and gamification can actually be helpful, despite their reputation for being superficial solutions. If checking your investment account balance gives you a small dopamine hit, and that dopamine hit motivates you to contribute more money, then the psychological reward is doing exactly what it's supposed to do. The key is being intentional about which behaviors you're rewarding rather than letting random psychological triggers drive your financial decisions. But let's address something that might be making all of this feel overwhelming. Like if you're dealing with serious financial trauma or anxiety, trying to implement discipline strategies might feel like putting a band-aid on a broken leg. And honestly, that's a fair assessment. Sometimes you need to address the underlying psychological wounds before you can build healthy financial habits on top of them. This is where financial therapy comes in. And no, that's not just a fancy term for budgeting advice. Financial therapy is a real field that combines traditional therapy techniques with financial planning to address the emotional and psychological roots of money problems. It recognizes that your relationship with money is actually a relationship, complete with all the complexity, irrationality, and emotional baggage that relationships involve. The goal isn't to eliminate all emotional responses to money, which would be impossible and probably unhealthy. The goal is to develop a healthier relationship with money where your emotions inform your decisions rather than controlling them completely. This means learning to sit with financial anxiety without being paralyzed by it, and learning to enjoy financial success without being consumed by guilt or fear of losing it. This process takes time and it's rarely linear. You might make progress for months, then hit a financial setback that triggers all your old patterns. That's not failure, that's just how healing works. The difference is that now you have awareness of what's happening rather than being completely at the mercy of unconscious reactions. Here's something that might surprise you about the people who seem naturally good with money. Most of them aren't naturally good at all. They've just gotten better at recognizing their triggers and creating systems that work around their psychological limitations rather than against them. The person who automatically saves 20% of their income isn't necessarily more disciplined than you. They might just be someone who set up automatic transfers because they know their future self can't be trusted to make that decision repeatedly. And speaking of future selves, let's talk about something that sounds completely ridiculous but actually works. having conversations with your future self. I know it sounds like something out of a self-help book written by someone who's never had a real job. But the research on this is surprisingly solid. People who regularly visualize and connect with their future self make significantly better financial decisions than those who don't. Think about it this way. When you're deciding whether to spend money on something you want right now, your brain is essentially weighing the happiness of your current self against the theoretical happiness of some abstract future person. Since your current self feels real and immediate, while your future self feels vague and distant, current self usually wins. But if you can make your future self feel more real and present, the calculation changes. This doesn't mean you need to have full conversations with yourself in public, though honestly, given the state of the world, that might be the least weird thing happening around you. It means taking time to actually imagine what your life will look like in 10 or 20 years based on the financial decisions you're making today. What will 65-year-old you think about the choices 35-year-old you is making right now? Sometimes this exercise is motivating because you realize how much your future self will benefit from current sacrifices. But sometimes it's terrifying because you realize your current spending patterns are essentially stealing from your future self. Either way, the emotional connection makes the long-term consequences feel more real, which naturally improves your decision making without requiring superhuman willpower. Look, I'm not going to lie to you and say that understanding your money psychology will instantly solve all your financial problems. Your bank account isn't going to magically fill up just because you've identified your childhood money trauma, and your credit cards won't pay themselves off through positive visualization. But what will change is your relationship with the process itself. Instead of feeling like a victim of your own financial decisions, you'll start to feel like someone who has choices, even when those choices are difficult. And honestly, that shift from helplessness to agency might be worth more than any investment return you'll ever see. If this video helped you understand why you do what you do with money, hit that like button and let me know in the comments what money script you recognize in yourself, because I guarantee you're not the only one.